Hello and welcome to Upside, where every week we look behind the headlines affecting European venture. Today, Mads, Lomax, myself, and we're talking about... We got war. What is it good for? Anthropic's defense fallout, AI redundancies, or is it market signaling? Infrastructure boom versus bubble, and Mertz says the quiet parts out loud.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Now, gentlemen, Lomax, yes, you're in a condolorious green grass surroundings
I'm
today.
color-coded today, no?
I'm loving it. Where are you? What are you doing?
I'm in the Maze office in Lisbon. Maze are probably one of Europe's leading impact funds
Nice.
and deep tech funds. I've just spent 2 days in London, which was amazing.
How was that?
Really
And
good.
why didn't you come and see us? What the heck?
Well,
man?
I had a liver MRI scan to check for what, and then
Okay.
I actually had a meals with 3 founders in the portfolio where I'm incredibly excited.
So you're still in
really,
flow.
really good.
Those that weren't listening last week, Lomax is in confidence mode. He's in the flow
Yeah,
mode.
in confidence mode. And then met a team that we've been getting to know potentially about a new investment and a couple of LPs. So it was a really good trip all around.
All right. Well,
Stayed with my mother-in-law as well. So,
did you? Any mother-in-law
Which was
jokes
great.
before we move on?
no, but she's wonderful. So
Okay. Good. Oh, that was quick. There was no gap. There was no pause. Straight in. Okay.
no air gap. No,
No, got it. Mads, you're a traveling Wilbur as well, huh?
Something like that, yes. Back in Singapore this week, I met lots of good partners here, some great partners of our portfolio companies, some LPs, yeah, but all of the good stuff.
And obviously it's late for you, so we'll be gentle. Although I know your brain, you're going to be absolutely fine. You're going to be on fire, even though it's probably near enough midnight for you. Now to kick off, gentlemen, we can't not talk about the war. Obviously, the podcast is called Upside. It is about European venture, but we can't not talk about the war. It's horrific. It's, we're not going to go into the human side, but obviously our hearts are in that. But parking the human tragedy, we've got to go into it. And the economic impact could be massive. And this will ripple all the way down to what we're doing and who we're serving and the markets that our founders are dealing with. And I didn't realize until this conflict or this part of the conflict started how important the Strait of Hormuz is for global trade. It's not just oil or gas, although oil is about 20% of global consumption. It's also fertilizers, it's chemicals, it's aluminium, it's jet fuel, grain, and all of these very important commodities come through that tiny, tiny strait. On top of all the standard stuff that goes to and fro. Obviously, the Gulf is a big importer of luxury goods from Europe. So there's the standard stuff that goes through that strait, that tiny bottleneck just between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think, and then Qatar and those other places all the way up to Kuwait. And last week, tanker throughput dropped 95%, which then instigated Trump to guarantee transit. So the big brush context here is energy, if it goes up, inflation up, interest rates up, investment down, money recycling down, all bad news for us. As an incidental, one aspect that I didn't quite consider is that getting crude prices up is actually good for Russia. So the second order effects of this challenge in the region on Ukraine could be quite high. And another unfun fact before we kick off, about 33% of the world's fertilizers come through that tiny, tiny little strait. So lots to unpack. Try and pair it back to Europe, startups, venture investing, and all that good stuff. And Mads, maybe if I can kick off with you, starting with the UK, how does this kind of roll through to us?
Well, I think the big context here is what it says about Europe and the UK and our place in the world. There's been lots of discussion about whether the UK should have participated in the strikes and what role the UK should have taken, being a close ally of the US, being a close ally of the Gulf countries, etc. And I think you could probably say maybe a bit of skepticism in terms of participation was warranted. The US didn't exactly get things right in Iraq. And so maybe there's a bit of once bitten, twice shy and all that stuff. That said, it does feel like we're a little bit on the sidelines right now. The truth is, the UK economy was already weak before the first missile hit. like UK OBR, kind of the group that forecasts and kind of checks and tries to say, what is really the fiscal situation of the UK PLC, the UK economy. It cut growth forecast to 1.1%, and that was before the war started. Unemployment is high, taxes heading for historic highs. So that picture is not exactly looking good. From a European perspective, we've got issues around having enough energy reserves, especially around gas. The European gas storage is down to very low levels, 46 billion cubic meters. It was 60 last year, 77 the year before. So we've been running the stores down, sort of 2 consecutive years of drawdowns here. And then, as you say, a lot of the fuels and a lot of the things we need are transiting through the Straits of Hormuz. So lots of impacts that could sort of impact us negatively. Now, that said, on balance, and here's your upside, Dan, I actually think this crisis might be shorter than many people think. I mean, already a couple of days ago, we started looking at the missile launch rate out of Iran, and that's been decaying at a very, very rapid rate. You sort of had 350 ballistic missiles on the first day, but only 50 on day 4. And the reason it's declining so fast is because all the launch capabilities, all the launchers are being destroyed very rapidly. And then you can say, okay, what's left? They're the drones. They're much easier to deal with. They're much slower. They have lower impact. And so that potentially means that the problem, the crisis could be contained, and therefore that things could sort of go back to normal, if you will, more quickly than worst case scenario right now. On the other hand, a lot of the proxy network that Iran had built up around the region has already been destroyed. Assad has fallen. Hezbollah has been degraded, etc. So there is an upside scenario potentially here that the crisis can be contained. You can get a better regime in Iran, and maybe we can all sort of peace can break out, and we can all sing Kumbaya. So here's to hoping.
I can't quite work out what the Americans' aim is. Is it regime change? Is that the goal? Because it's never been done by the air before, so I'm kind of.
I think it's very. I think Trump. He's very transactional. I mean, I think they've sort of said early on, look, there are 3 things the Iranians need to stop doing. They need to stop sponsoring terrorist networks. They need to stop developing the nuclear missile capabilities, and they need to stop developing these the nukes and also the missile launch capabilities to threaten the region. And actually, I think if the regime at some point gets to feel enough pain, there might be somebody there that says, look, we can agree to those 3 things. We're going to stop, in which case I think Trump's going to stop. And I think this could possibly blow over. You saw in Venezuela, he was relatively pragmatic, right? They got Maduro and kind of let the rest of the regime move on. That may not be what Iranians in exile are looking for. They might be looking for something more radical. But I'm not sure he is going to push as hard for regime change as some people think or would like. So this is just a speculation.
Yeah, but if they don't, then it feels like this is just going to be there'll be another cycle in another period of time. So I don't know. Obviously the region is extremely difficult and troubled.
You say that. I mean, Khamenei, we had a completely, ironclad ideology of exporting terror to the region. It's kind of the starting point from the Iranians during the negotiations, where they sort of sat down with the Americans and said, look, we just want to let you know, we've enriched enough uranium to 60% that we now have capacity to build 11 nuclear bombs. We just think you should know. And which caused, of course, Trump hit the wall and said, okay, F you, talks are over, we're going to send in the B-2s. And I'm not sure that was such a bad idea. You're dealing with somebody who has been terrorizing not just the near Middle East, but the world for more than 30 years. The biggest sponsor of state terrorism anywhere in the world. There was no negotiating with him. And I think now at least there's a hope that at some point you're going to get to people that are, maybe not friendly the way we would like them, but maybe at least not as hostile as he was. Because it's hard to imagine anybody much more hostile than him. I mean, he was just categorically death to Israel, death to the UK, death to America, death to anybody, basically, who is not what he was.
But it's such an entrenched institution. They've been in power for 40 years. It was 79? When was
but these things are still run by people. Those things are still run by people. But yes,
you're not wrong.
Absolutely. And it's not easy. I think what I would say is, and this is, back to us and our role in the world. The truth is, Europe is watching from the sidelines. We were informed minutes before the strikes on a conflict that controls our energy supply. There's a split politically in Europe about what we should do. You had the same pattern with Russia and Ukraine. Russia attacks. We, the U.S., U.S. We couldn't defend Ukraine without the U.S. At the time. U.S. can overthrow the regime in the Middle East. We're nowhere. And so again, it's back to the thing we've been discussing so often. What is our role in the world? And are we satisfied being bystanders to things that impact us to the extent they do?
I was looking at how much Qatar is going to be important for liquefied natural gas for Europe and the UK, and how that percentage is from whatever in the single digits up to 20% over the next decade. So obviously this is going to be an extremely important conflict. So we will see. Lomax, bring this back to Europe for us. Bring this back to what's going to stand on our doorsteps.
I think there's three things. One is around energy. One is around defense and defense micro supply chains. And three is around geopolitical points that Mads kind of touched on that also touches into sovereignty and defense, right? So the first one is energy. I think this, again, exposes our over-reliance on gas in the UK and Europe, which was massively exposed by Russia and is now exposed 4 years later. Mads just touched on some of the figures there. And the reason why we have so much reliance on gas is because we switched out, for climate reasons, we switched out of coal into gas, like fair enough. We still need gas to backstop the intermittent production from solar and wind, right? Because we don't have enough baseload, clean baseload power. So I think this throws up opportunities for startups, both like the deep infrastructure startups working at that kind of nuclear level, the small
We're going to talk about
reactors,
a big fusion later. So yes,
correct. So I think in terms of like founders building companies, this is yet another exposure of that massive problem, right? And this is going to hit people in the pocket because
this isn't going anywhere, is it? This is going to be around for decades. No. This is not changing anytime soon.
We have a huge reliance on gas, right? And don't forget also that the way that electricity pricing works is that you price it when you call on gas as a last resort because you've got less wind or less solar. You take the gas price and you apply that across the whole chain, right? Which means that it sets the price for the whole market. So as long as that that's a kind of structural way they structure electricity prices. But as long as that continues, when you have events like this, which have driven up gas prices by 70%, you're going to have like huge impacts on people's energy bills. And this then becomes a massive cost of living issue. So if you're founders building startups in, for example, nuclear, both either energy storage or energy power generation, you're going to be singing into the singing to the ears of the politicians, right? And hopefully investors. And then I guess companies like Fuse Energy that are maybe working on the more consumer end as well. Like this kind of is a place that is going to be a good place to build companies, right? Massive investment is needed, right? The second one I think is a really interesting one, which is around defense supply chain. So these drones that the Iranians have been firing out, these like suicide kamikaze drones, the Shaheds, right? They cost, I think, 40,000. And they are being defended by the folks in the UAE, by Saudis, quite often with these Patriot missiles which cost millions.
These are the Martyr drones, right?
Yes, you've got them, Martyr or kamikaze drones. Right. Now, the Russians have their own equivalent, right? Which they've been using very effectively in Ukraine. Now, very interestingly, the Ukrainians...
They licensed?
Yes, the Russians licensed them. They licensed them from the Ukrainians, from the Iranians, and they call them, they have Gibran 2 and Gibran 3. Gibran 2 goes, I think, 160 kilometers an hour. Now, what the Ukrainians have developed, right, and this is why I want to use the term fast fashion. The supply chain for defense has moved from these big, long tail, heavy like artillery goods projects or complex systems to bootstrapped, nimble, agile, fast fashion type projects. And for example, what the Ukrainians have developed is a bunch of these interceptor drones, which cost a few K each, right? Which latch onto the Gibran 2s or the Shaheds, if you're in Iranian, these kamikaze drones, right? And that's how they've been defending themselves, right? And now there are like dozens of companies in Ukraine that have developed these. And why this is interesting is that the the Middle Eastern countries are now talking about licensing that technology and spinning up production capability for those, rather than buying the millions of dollars of Patriot missiles from the Americans.
Because warfare
right?
has changed, right?
And also Zelensky is totally on board with this, because he's like, the more of like the cheap stuff that we can make or license to them and they can make, there's only so many like Patriot missiles in the world, or delivery systems, like they can save them for us who really, really need them, right? So it's a really interesting to see, and I mentioned it last time, which is that Ukraine has become this hub of R&D for the next generation of defense. You're now seeing it actually applied into warfare and conflicts in other areas, right? So you're seeing that actually being applied now. So I think, and I talked about Ukraine becoming the kind of R&D hub. One of the benefits of the conflict is that Europe actually, in trying to build a sovereign defense capability, now has that capability in-house. In fact, they're better at it than the Americans, for example. Well, the Americans are now looking to license. I think that's a very, very interesting thing that's come up as a result of this. The final point is geopolitical one that Mads touched on. It's a couple of things which do play into, I think, just business building generally in Europe, right? It's like, look at what's going on with Spain and, not letting the US use their air bases. And this is the problem with Europe, where you have like almost the lowest common denominator in terms of like, there's no single coherent foreign diplomatic policy that Europe has compared to, like, for example, the US. And I think that's a major, major problem, because, you have Spain saying that they want to do, the Europeans feel like they have to back up Spain. And then also we need to kind of be close to the US. So I think it makes it very, very difficult. And I think, and the final point just on the geopolitics of this, which ties into defense and defense investing and defense R&D and startups, which is that basically, as Mads said, Europe has basically no direct military leverage in the region. They don't have a single foreign policy. Our main geopolitical tools in Europe are trade power, sanctions, regulatory influence, and diplomacy, right? And actually, when you have crises like this, without a kind of big stick, Europe is just alienated. And it's the second biggest economy in the world, one of the biggest trading blocs, and we haven't got a seat at the table. And everyone has a different opinion of this. It's freaking crazy. And it affects key supply chains for critical stuff. So it's just yet another wake-up call about the inability of Europe to stand on its own 2 feet. I mean, look, we're now seeing a ton of investment go into this area, but it's just yet another example of that.
And time and attention. So we'll talk a bit more about Mertz later and him saying the quiet parts out loud, but it feels like the time, attention, the defense budget. But it's going to take time to wash through. Let us look at Anthropic versus the Pentagon. The US government has turned on one of its own. It's still at time of press. We're recording this on Thursday at about 2 p.m. UK time. And this is still in the news cycle and will probably be all upside down by the time this goes out. But last week, this AI company, Anthropic, told the Pentagon no, and the US government then tried to kill it, and is still trying to kill it. Anthropic refused to let its models be used for mass surveillance, autonomous weapons, and then the Pentagon does designate it as a supply chain threat to national security. Now, as far as I can see, Hegseth hasn't actually activated that. I don't know the proper legal definitions here, but it hasn't been activated. But this is still in threat territory, but it's still meaningful. It does mean that other companies are going to think twice about using Anthropic. Now, this is a designation that's never been placed on an American company before. Trump has then gone off and said to all federal agencies, stop using the tech, even though as of today's date, they are still using it because it's really hard to decouple. You think for a consumer, fine, they can get an OpenAI product or a Gemini or whatever. But if you're embedded, and especially through Palantir products and through other third parties through the other side, it's really hard to just decouple what's been going on and not be using Anthropic's products. OpenAI then swooped in, signed a new deal. Sam Altman later admitted it looked opportunistic and sloppy. I think that's generous. Consumers have sided with Anthropic. Claude shot to number 1 in the App Store. ChatGPT uninstalls jumped nearly 300%. And then we saw quitgpt.org. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but that has now hit more than 2.5 million signatories. But I can't quite work out what matters here. Obviously, defense spend massive. I think Palantir, it's more than 50% of their revenues. I'm not quite sure where it fits with Anthropic, but it's going to be sizable and for their future. Anthropic's revenue run rate has doubled to $20 billion this year-ish so far. Mads are going to come back for the exact figures to you in a sec. Is Dario just being a snowflake? Is this meaningful? What's going to happen to revenues? How is this all going to fold out?
100%. Like, I'm a huge Claude fanboy. We've been using the technology for a long time. The tech is genuinely the best. And that's why we use it. That's why the Pentagon uses it. That's why everybody uses it. And Claude was literally used in planning the Iran operation last week. It was used in planning the Venezuela operation. Okay, it's used via Palantir's, as you say, Palantir's classified platform. Now, that said, our position seems reasonable at face value, right? Dario, he's got principles. That's why he left OpenAI. Who wants mass surveillance? Who wants killer drones in their backyard? I mean, it all kind of seems right sensible, what he's saying. But I must admit, I do find the politics of it a little bit silly. I think Ben Thompson, he argued very well in Stratechery. Look, Amodei, he has said himself that selling AI chips to China is like selling nuclear weapons to North Korea. He has himself leveled AI as the most powerful of powerful technologies. And the truth is, private company CEOs do not get to choose. If you're working in a country, if you're part of that country, you do not get to choose or veto what the country uses your technology for. I mean, yes, you can say I'm a private business. I don't want to sell my tech to you, but then you can't also say this is the most powerful thing we have. You can't on one hand say we are like nuclear weapons, but my government doesn't get to decide over these nuclear weapons.
But Mads, this is the first time. I mean, if you look at Musk and Starlink and SpaceX, this is the first time that privateers in certain contexts are more important than government departments, right? I mean, this is genuinely an odd time in history.
Exactly, and it is obviously for politicians to regulate. It's for the Congress, it's for the administration to decide how things are being used if they're that powerful. Now, if you sell ice cream, you can decide not to sell ice cream to another person. That's fine. If you sell nuclear weapons, you cannot decide that your government cannot buy and use those nuclear weapons. They are too powerful for that. If you want to be in that game, that's the game you're in. And the question is, should our armed forces be regulated by elected leaders or by corporate executives? And there's no real question about that. Of course, it has to be through a democratically elected government. Now, on the other hand, this just might be the best marketing campaign in tech history. I mean, as you pointed out yourself, they've grown from 9 billion revenue run rate at the end of 25 to 14 billion a month ago, and now they're at nearly at 20 billion. Right? So they've doubled in 3 months. We've just never seen anything like it before. And it's been adopted by, enterprise adoption of Claude and Claude Code and all these things. And then, of course, they've been driving a lot of swimming up a lot from OpenAI right now. So whether it's calculated or not, it's looked like the refusal has worked in the short term for Dario. But I do think he could be sowing the seeds of future trouble. The truth is today, he's got the best platform. So he has the possibility, he has the capacity to have, to be a bit virtue signaling, because when you have the best product, people need you. But if he gets to a point where he doesn't have the best tech, then this could come back to bite him. And this is potentially where the issues are.
Did you want to dig into the European piece?
Yeah, listen, in Europe, we've spent years telling business leaders they should act like politicians, right? Businesses need to solve the climate change. Businesses need to fix inequality. Businesses need to do all this virtue signaling. And the result has been in Europe, we've got weaker companies, we've got weaker economies, we've got a poorer continent, and we have less influence on the world and on solving the things we want to solve. Now, I think the job of business is to be really, really good at creating goods and services that people want to buy, because that's the bedrock of wealth of a society. And then we need to elect politicians, and it's for them to redistribute and decide what is virtuous and what isn't. And I just think when we confuse these roles and we want the business people, we want to confuse them with saying you have to be like politicians, you end up being neither, and you end up like as number 2 and number 3, and you fall behind, you get poorer, and then you can't do all the good things you want to do. And I really think the only way to win is to compete and be the best. And we can do that if we want to, but we have to decide that that's what we want to.
Lomax, you're gonna have a strong opinion on this one, aren't you?
No, I just think that the Anthropic Dario can't have his cake and eat it. If you want to sell, if you want to win big contracts with the Department of Defense. Oh, which by the way, Dario, has just been renamed the Department of War. And you knew that like Trump and Hegseth are running it. Like you can't like have the benefit of these like big enterprise deals and at the same time have the kind of restrictions that he's trying to look to put in. I'm afraid like if you want to make the money and you want to do it, there's an element of like naivete, I would say, about that. Clearly, I don't have all the context, right? But I do think, and you've drawn on it, like there is something very smart about positioning as Anthropic as like not the AI company that does all of these, that, you know, participating in mass surveillance, participating in autonomous systems that can kill people without, you know, a human in the loop. If Anthropic wants to commercially make that decision and make a virtue of it, which it seems to be doing, that's really, really great. But don't go and sign contracts with the Pentagon if that's your vibe.
Well, they obviously had a contract with the Pentagon, otherwise they wouldn't have been in there in the first place.
Don't be surprised when you get into these kind of sticky situations. One thing that I definitely think is overreach and is unfair in Anthropic is this like potential designation for them as being, you know, the same as Tencent and Huawei and all these other Chinese companies that are banned from all government business. I think that's that's clearly an overcorrection from the White House that maybe is excessive saber rattling that ultimately can probably be negotiated away.
Let's try and explore that for a second, Lomax,
yes.
Because there's an argument that says if somebody in your nation holds the most powerful technology and doesn't want to let the government use it, the government has to destroy that business. Okay, let's try and examine the steps. Now, we all know, or at least Dario frequently says, that Chinese open source labs are using distilled models from Anthropic to train their models on. Do we think that the Chinese open source model developers have qualms around how the Chinese government use their models? And even if they do we think they have a say? Because what we're seeing today is it's very likely that anything Anthropic develops quite quickly ends up in the hands of the Chinese open source model developers that then becomes can be used by the Chinese government. Yeah. So what Anthropic is effectively saying is you, U.S. government, under which protection we live, can't use the technology, but we are also saying over here that the Chinese have access to it. Is that a situation the U.S. government can afford to let exist?
Yeah, it's a very hard question.
I think there's a little bit of conflation in there, though, Mads. I mean, it's not like Anthropic has much to say about how their models are distilled.
That's the reality. Dario himself is the one who says this is as powerful as nuclear weapons. That's the business you're in. But you're saying your government can't use them, but you also know that the other side, quote unquote, can.
Well, the fact is the government has options here, no? I mean, yeah, but I guess if they had a monopoly position and they were the only company that were doing this, sure. But
this only matters because they're the best. If they were number 3, nobody would care.
I want to move gear. I want to talk about something that doesn't always go down that well on this podcast, but AI stealing your jobs. Everyone would have seen, heard, and watched the news cycle about Jack Dorsey at Block and how his memo was received. So just to remind the room, Block is cutting 40% of its workforce from over 10,000 to down to under 6,000. And I think using AI as this excuse, and I'm calling bullshit on this, because Block ballooned from 4,000 employees in 19 to over 13,000 in 21. And its share price pretty much dropped from 22 down 75%, has stayed bottom rung, as pretty low as it's ever been. And it's still 69% down on its 2022 peak. So I don't see it as some visionary AI restructuring. I see it as simply a return to pre-COVID headcount, and it's a bit of a dressing up. Now, this then means that they're targeting more than 2 million in gross margin per employee, which is roughly 4x what we saw at pre-COVID levels. So I don't know what's going on behind the scene operationally in this business, but this is pretty nuts. And I just don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to pull a Klarna. They're going to start rehiring when things start to improve. I think they're going to have real operational struggles. And for context, I just want to look at a little bit of the wider market. So on the AI culling jobs front, by the end of 25, US companies, including HP, Amazon, Pinterest, Workday, and many, many others, they were all hitting the headlines, and they all collectively cut about 55,000 jobs, blaming AI. Behind the scenes, nearly 60% of US hiring managers surveyed say they emphasize AI in the role cutting piece because they perceive that to be viewed more favorably than stating financial constraints or operational challenges or other wordology. So, in other words, they're basically saying admitting that AI is better PR than saying we overhired. Now, so I don't think there's anything in this, but is there anything that you would like to pick up on? I agree, disagree, please fight. Lomax, did you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Like, I think that the company had become horribly bloated and that Jack might be using a bit of a smokescreen here to, he might see the market getting a bit choppier, which is maybe something we'll come on to. And this is a kind of covert, disguised reduction in force, right? Which may be a smart time to do it and a smart smokescreen under which to do it. I mean, the market has responded broadly positive, right? Up 25% off the back of this news.
Yeah, but I mean, but from you can't really see the uptick in the graph, even though it's a 25% nearly uplift. Yeah.
The only thing I would say is if you referenced Klarna, right? Who made a big thing in 2023 about leaning in heavily into AI, partnering with OpenAI to automate large parts of its business. The headline claim from them that was that AI could handle the work of 700 customer service agents, support operations were heavily automated. And so that experiment ultimately failed because I think they found too many hallucinations, too many edge cases or complex cases that the service agents just couldn't handle, right? Basically, the technology wasn't quite ready. The only thing that if you look at what Jack is saying, it seems to me that they're going to be deploying AI and or reducing headcount. Like they're reducing like duplication, middle management, internal layers of people, right? So, and maybe they're going to be using AI, not necessarily customer facing, but internally. Maybe you could distinguish there, but which in a way that it actually might be genuine and more likely to succeed than what Klarna did. But certainly, there's definitely a bit of both here. There's definitely like, he saw the payroll. It's like, this is too big. Things are getting choppier. Bitcoin's way down. Got more competition. Except even though the numbers are pretty good quarter on quarter at the moment at the company, I think it's a convenient
margins are good
time to do it.
I looked at the numbers thinking that there would be a different story, and it's not. Margins are actually quite fine.
Yeah,
I think this is just oops, we hired too many people. He did the same thing at Twitter. Oops. And then he's a bit of an Elon fanboy, so I'm sure he's looking at what he did at Twitter and going, right, let's cull this ship. Mads, you'll probably have a different take on the tech and the tech impact. Is that fair?
No, I think he's quite smart in terms of how he positioned it. He's talking about this massive step change in December, and we've lived it. We've talked about it live on the weekly pods, right? Opus 4.5 at the end of last year converted even the holdovers. Andrej Karpathy said, it didn't work before December. It's worked since. It was a massive step change. And then we saw another step change again with Opus 4.6 this year. Again, we're back to Anthropic technology. They are running the world right now. It's incredible. Yeah. So we've seen things become more productive. We've seen it in our portfolio. Devs is saying, look, we used to have teams of 10. Now we have teams of 5, and they are more productive, right? They put them in these little groups. The truth is, well-run companies, they grow with it. They don't use it to get rid of 40% of headcount. And it is absolutely, you should say, because they become bloated. It's also because the Bitcoin thing and the kind of the whole crypto side of the business didn't quite work out the way they were hoping over the last year. They've had some beating up there. The market really bought the signal when he announced the layoffs, because that's what they are, and the stock shot up. And yeah, the substance is definitely thinner than his memo suggests, but he got away with it, I think, to a large extent, and good on him. There'll be some AI doomers out there that are happy that they're seeing this.
I'm not sure that he got away with it. I think everybody's having the same conversation. But let's talk about
stock prices up though. That's what he wanted, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. If you're helping and serving your market, then fair enough. Let's talk about some of the big AI stuff, and the upshot here is massive investment by the hyperscalers in, I think we've already touched on it a little bit, in this kind of extremely volatile kind of slightly troubled, obviously now war-torn world. So hyperscalers planning to spend, depending on what numbers you read, around $650 billion on infrastructure this year alone. $650 billion. Some are in the 7s to the 800s, and some are in the 5s and 6s. So I've kind of split the difference there. Meta just committed a $60 billion to AMD to do a chip deal and receive a 10% equity stake. So that's quite an interesting deal. I'm sure we'll have an opinion on that. Meanwhile, Lux Capital is writing black swan memos to its founders saying, brace for impact. Only a handful of AI startups actually matter, and the rest of you need to stretch your cash and plan for the worst. This isn't the first black swan we've seen in as many years. Foundation Capital still shouting about the SaaSpocalypse after $1 trillion got wiped off the stock market in a single week. So we're seeing this massive infrastructure boom. We're not quite sure how that's going to roll out and how energy is going to be provided. Although I remember reading that Trump has asked all of the hyperscalers to provide their own energy. So don't know how that's going to work out. But we've got this massive infrastructure push. We've got this very kind of volatile, scary macro that we're living in. Oh, and one other thing to throw into the pot. DeepSeek is about to drop version 4, a trillion parameter multimodal model built on Chinese chips, or was it built on Chinese chips? Mads, you might have some insight there. So I know, Mads, specifically, you're kind of bored of me going on about the bubble story stuff, but are we bifurcating even more? What would you like to dig into here?
Look, bubble, right? Everybody's talking about the bubble, but Anthropic, they grew from 9 billion ARR in Q4 to 19 billion now. We've never seen anything like it before, guys. I mean, this is going to be fastest 20 bill of AR in history.
We'll have to keep an eye on their Q2 figures. They might not be so juicy, but sure.
That's what we've been saying every quarter, and every quarter they've been blowing it away.
Did you see, guys, that OpenAI, I don't know if you saw it was announced today, that OpenAI have just announced 25 billion ARR. And if you take the last week of trading from OpenAI, it's 30 billion. If you annualize
the run
last
rate.
week.
Wow. Okay.
Clearly, there is some substance to this, and we know because we live it every day.
Yep.
If you take the whole world, I mean, this one's been doing the rounds, right? If you take the whole world and you split it up into chunks of 3 million people, well, then 80% have never even used AI, and of the 20% that have used AI, kind of 95% have never paid for it. It's all been free, or freemium, kind of ChatGPT or Gemini. And a very, very small proportion have been paying for AI monthly subscription, and an even smaller proportion, 1 out of 2,500 have been using sort of the sophisticated tools like Claude Code and Codex and paid more. So in terms of monetization, we are so early in this, and there's so much upside in terms of how this will monetize. So yes, of course, we're seeing froth. We're seeing seed stage companies coming out, pre-seed companies come out with a deck and a couple of OpenAI renegades that have left the ship, raising a $2 billion seed round, right, with nothing more than good intentions and a nice name. That feels frothy, and a lot of people will be burned on that sort of thing. Elon Musk putting a price tag of $250 billion on XAI that's doing 60 million of AI revenue. It's got nuts numbers. But then there are companies like Anthropic, and it's the real deal. So I don't know. Yes, there's froth here and there, but I think what really matters is there is also so much substance underneath.
Lomax, where would you take this on?
I spent a bit of time with this Black Swan memo that Josh Wolf put out at Lux Capital. I mean, the history of Black Swan memos is fascinating, right? And there's the famous Sequoia one, right, from 2000 before the dot-com crash. I mean, if you're a venture firm, there's actually quite low risk in whenever you feel there's any kind of frothiness, just put out a Black Swan memo because, if you are wrong, everyone will forget it. And if you are right, you'll look like
you're a genius.
On
you
the
can
world.
Michael Burry it.
Maybe Outsized should start putting out Black Swan memos every 6 month, and eventually we'll be right. but actually, it's probably worth just diving in, because I think Josh and the Lux guys are very thoughtful and very smart. And although I think Josh's language is sometimes a little bit too flowery, I actually think they have for some very, very smart things to say. So I think the substance of this memo here is he's basically saying, look, at the kind of macroeconomic level, 10-year gilt yield hit a 4-month low while stocks hit all-time high. And when they diverge this wildly, the fixed income tends to be the better signal, right? So things are looking a little bit bearish at the macro level. He also points out to this interesting thing that we haven't actually talked about a lot here, which is that physical infra is seeing a lot of interventions now. So he said over 300 data centers in the US are now seeing moratoria put on them, right? This is all planning, local objections, etc. And that potentially will slow things down and cause a bit of a bottleneck in all of this CapEx and then time to revenue, I guess, for these companies. The tariff situation, which we talked about. And then also, he interestingly points out, going back to the exact thing we just talked about, the Jack Dorsey memo, is that the markets have rewarded Block's news with a 20% gain. So he basically is saying, looking at all of these things, and he's like, look, to be honest, things may be okay, but the cost of preparation is trivially low, and the value of being positioned well is asymmetrically high. So he's basically saying, well, if you can prepare for it, then you should. What are they actually saying, in terms of what founders should be doing? Kind of obvious stuff, reviewing your runway, reviewing your venture debt covenants if you got those. Totally curiously, this is something that it's worth focusing on because it also shows that they don't know what the hell is going on, right? So he says, if your growth depends on scaling cloud infra, verify your commitments and understanding where your workloads physically run. We can see scenarios where there is a glut of availability and lots of capacity, and scenarios where there is chaos and confusion and disruption. So, they're even admitting there's going to be some element of chaos, but at either end of the spectrum, and we can't predict it. He's kind of, hedging his bets there. But look, I think it's an interesting thing to be seeing in this market. I've definitely been counseling our founders, given that when things go wrong, they go wrong very, very fast. So the moment actually they start to go wrong, it's too late. You can't just suddenly go and raise money. So actually, having the extra cash on the balance sheet that you maybe don't need today but might need tomorrow is a smart thing. If you can raise money relatively inexpensively in terms of pricing and or time commitment to get it in, definitely not a bad thing to be doing now.
I don't know enough about the premise was short versus was it 10-year.
The
bond
divergence
yields?
between the divergence
And
between
the publics.
the bonds become very risk off and the equity is very risk on. It says bonds basically tend to be right.
I don't know if that's a good lens anymore. Haven't those yields been inverted for 3 or 4 years? I don't know. It's not. It feels quite a shaky premise to go, look, everything, the world has turned to shit.
Well, and also,
based on this.
one of the propositions was on tariffs, and that changes every week. So it's again, it just reminds us that we live in such an area of uncertainty. And look, the one thing that we know for sure at the moment is everything is so inconsistent and uncertain that it is better to
but isn't that just do
have
good
more
business?
runway than you would like?
Isn't he basically saying, just be smart and do good business?
I think what he is saying though is don't go and overspend. This is not a time to be ramping up. That's what he's saying. It's like, you chat to founders now when multiple conversations over the last few days. It's like, well, we could really accelerate here. We could start, really going for it, shortening our runway in the anticipation that, the financing market will be there. Maybe that's right in some verticals, but maybe it's actually the wrong thing in some cases.
If you're an energy,
I'm all for that, generally. Sorry?
If you're an energy, I was coming back to our previous conversation. Okay. I found
if you're in
burger.
defense, for example, could you keep, some of these companies have insane pipelines now. It's like, well, should we just keep ripping out cash on this assumption that, we'll be able to raise?
I think it comes down to, the kind of business you're in, the kind of founder you're in, the opportunity that you have. Because I think I found a lot of what he was saying, there was an equal and opposite opportunistic vector where you can say, great, now you can take the lead on this competitor, or now you can, launch this new version of a product or service. I found it was great, nice kind of brain fodder, but not I didn't find it of that much substance.
Well, one thing that I'm not necessarily seeing the smartest thing from in the market, and I maybe I need to spend more time thinking about this, is some of these companies. Okay, so when you're raising 25, 30, 40, $50 million rounds, right? And you want to go and spend that on growth. I still see insane hiring sprees. This is mainly like anecdotal on LinkedIn, right? From a bunch of companies and JDs like job descriptions out there across a range of positions. And I'm like, the intense pressure to generate the growth in this market of a top decile company is so high, and you have such little time to think that you might, in error, just go to the kind of default position of, let's just hire a fuck ton of people who are good at this and get these numbers right.
What else
And I
are you
don't
going to
think
spend the
people
money
have
on?
enough time to put the systems in place to become, well, what else are you going to spend the money on? Exactly. Maybe you don't spend it, is the point. Or maybe, you become so focused on increasing the revenue per employee through using AI. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like it's an insane divergence now that we're seeing, that even some of these vertical AI companies are behaving like traditional SaaS companies in their hiring. What do you think, Mads? You always have a good opinion on this.
I'll go out on a bit of a limb here. I think for advice to be good, it has to be meaningful. I think saying to founders, if it's not too much effort and you don't have to make any trade-offs, you should raise more money. I think it's not very good advice, because if there's no trade-off, what does it really mean? I think the real question is, if there is a trade-off, so is it take the next 3 months to focus on fundraising, or take the next 3 months to focus on growing the company? That's a real trade-off. And how do you advise founders in that situation? For me, that's actually more valuable. And right now, to me, it doesn't feel like one of those stop growing the business and just focus everything on getting in cash. I don't think this thing is going to blow up. That might be famous last words. But from everything we're seeing in the fundamentals, Anthropic's revenue growth, OpenAI's revenue growth, what we see in terms of AI adoption, this is not a crazy bubble with no fundamentals. This is the biggest tectonic shift in business and technology in our lifetime that's unfolding in front of our eyes. And so you're going to want to be in it. Now, being in it means having capital. Of course, you can't be, I've got 2 weeks left in the bank. If you do, you better get your skis on. But I would also say, if it's, am I growing the company, or am I just constantly fundraising, not even really thinking about growing my business? I think just grow the business now. Now's the time.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned this this SaaSpocalypse review by Foundation Capital, right? Which doesn't say a lot new, but it does reiterate that their opinion is that software markets will be 10x bigger in 10 years' time. So like, there's still such a big opportunity here.
I don't think you can release a memo like that in the general form. I don't think personally it's particularly helpful. Let's move on, because I want to talk about, I want to share with you my favorite quote of the week from Friedrich Merz. It is, "We are simply no longer productive enough," which obviously then went viral because there's quite an unusual thing to hear, especially from a German chancellor. He was speaking to his Christian Democratic Union members at a rally after he returned from China. And we've seen before, when people have gone to China, got scared at how incredible they are at X thing, and then come back at, oh my goodness, we need to do something. So he then went to the Oval Office, thanking Trump, backing regime change in Tehran, offering German defense access. For a little bit of background and context, German defense spending has jumped from 86 billion euros to 108 billion this year, against the backdrop where things aren't going well for the German economy. They grew 0.2% in 25, which is even worse than the UK, which is saying something. Unemployment at a 12-year high. Now, historically, they've never hit NATO. They hadn't hit NATO's 2% target. They haven't hit it since the early 90s, and they hit it for the first time in 24. And he's backing NATO's 5% target, and he's publicly pressuring Spain to fall into line. And also behind the scenes, the FCAS fighter jet program is falling apart. It's probably dead. The Germans are now saying they're going to onboard American F-35s instead. They've fallen out with France on the project. So some super bold noises from Merz. I'm not quite sure. We need Germany at the party. We need them at the table. He's elegantly, beautifully saying the quiet parts out loud, being an extremely powerful leader. But I'm not sure where this leaves us, what can be done. Mads, I don't know, I've said a lot of wordology and word salad in there, but what would you pick up on first?
I think, as you say, it's refreshing to hear him say what he is saying. I mean, let's just go back to the top of the show here where we talked about what's happening in the Middle East. Europe can't shape events that we depend on. And I think Mertz's answer here is realpolitik. I mean, I'd rather us being in a situation where we're not behind, where we don't have to ask everybody else for help, but at least let's acknowledge where we are and then act in whatever way we can to further the long-term prosperity of the continent. Now, Merz went to China. He got the Airbus deals done there, right? 120 new aircraft sold into China. We talk about how China has become the best at making everything. Europe is the best in the world at making aircraft. Not number 2 or 3 or 4, the best. Airbus is the best company on the planet, and we should definitely use that and leverage that the best way we can. And then
China have tried them, Mads, haven't they? China have tried. I've seen their own airliners. They just can't sell them internationally.
Of course, and maybe they'll catch up one day, right? We said 10 years ago they'll never catch up with our automotive industry. Maybe they will, but today we're the best. So let's celebrate that. I think that's a great thing. He's gone to the U.S., of course. He has been, working the Trump angle. He's working the Xi angle. We have to be realistic about where we are in the world, and then we have to work harder and smarter. There was this comfortable illusion that let the other people work hard. We just need to work smarter regulation, better. It's not enough anymore. We have to do both. We've been too conservative. We've been too stuck in the old ways. We've been too in hock to narrow pressure groups. I know, Lomax, your favorites are the NIMBYs, right? And the NIMBYs have been running the continent, and we got to move beyond that. So those are some of the angles. And you're talking about FCAS. That's super interesting, right? This joint French-German fighter project. There have been other projects that were successful. Airbus is one of them. Airbus it took a long time to get off the ground, but eventually became very, very successful. So these things sometimes take time.
Lomax, which bit would you pick up on in this lovely melee?
I would go an extreme on this. I would literally be like, kill FCAS, waste of fucking time.
Really?
Yeah. I'd be like, you've spent 10 years effing about trying to collaborate across 3 different countries to build what was then potentially a next generation fighter jet. By the time you deliver it,
I thought it was just Germany, France. Who's the third country? Oh,
Spanish.
Spain. Oh, yeah.
You don't even want to fight. So, like,
what's the hang on? What's the British Japanese one, or is there a French? There's a Japanese.
You're totally right, and I've forgotten the acronym. The Swedes are involved in it as well. I think Leonardo's involved in that one.
This is British, Italian, Japanese.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's still going ahead, right, Mads?
Absolutely, and that's actually progressing very well. No, so the argument is not that FCAS.
I need to say my piece.
Done.
My piece is this.
Sorry.
No.
You go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm using it as an example. It's like, guys, you've got Anduril in the US, Saronic in the US you've got Anduril in the US building the next generation of autonomous swarm, no human in the loop, next generation fighter jet war planes. You've got Saronic doing the same with the Navy in the US, raising billions and tens of billions and winning billions of contracts, right? The Germans are going to spend 120 billion, roughly 115 billion on defense this year. And they want to spend, I think, less than 8% of that on US equipment and services, right? So, like, isn't now the time to say, I'm not spending any more money on FCAS. I'm going to spend all of my money on the future of warfare, on the systems of the future. Because by the time FCAS is delivered, it will be a white elephant.
But they're not European. Are you saying by American tech?
No, sorry. If it wasn't clear. Building and backing European companies building that stuff. The Helsings and the various other companies, Stark.
Got it.
Those kind of things.
Just not the Airbus. Was it Dassault? Who are the two?
Two Dassault Systems in France. The US has already pivoted to what they call collaborative combat aircraft. So they're developing autonomous drones designed to fly alongside fighters. These are called collaborative combat aircraft. And effectively, one expensive fighter controls all of these swarm drones. The Chinese have something similar. I just think there is an opportunity now to rip some of the old ways up and start again. The problem, of course, also, apart from ego and pride, national pride, is also the unions and a bit of geopolitics in terms of these are programs that employ a lot of people. You know,
I thought
guess
the
you would,
challenge was mainly the CEOs basically saying, I want to be the lead. And the other guy going,
no,
no,
there
I want
is
to
an
be the
ego
lead.
thing
And I want to be the
No,
lead.
of course, and exactly.
I don't know what's true. I don't know.
And
what's
also,
true
like, you know, also when things go wrong, like whose fault is it, and who's not
Yeah,
working
yeah.
hard enough?
Yeah.
I just think I don't think that's the way to build these systems of the future. So I would spend the money on if you want to allocate to the big future weapons of war of the future. You know, there's big projects that need a lot of investment, and then there's also these kind of, like we talked about, these interceptor drones that the Ukrainians have built that cost a few thousand instead of the millions of Patriot missiles, right? You can start to build up that capability, which is a whole new different capability in supply chain that needs investment. And because you actually, if you want to build those things at scale, look at the Iranians running out of missiles. I mean, talk about the Americans running out of missiles at some point, right? So if you want to take the best of what's been built in Ukraine and you want to scale that up, that's a whole new production facility capability. I called it fast fashion earlier. I think it's very, very similar, right? And I think you need to invest in that. And then in terms of the big marquee projects, forget about all the old stuff. Start again. Yeah.
So you're saying anything that's cross-border, cross-company, collaboration
These are old
is
ways of
out.
doing things. Old ways of doing
For
things.
sure. For sure. So back your prime in your country to deliver your thing.
Yeah. And you know, ideally you'd get to a position where you'd be happy with Europe in fostering a few different neoprimes from different areas, and you don't have just to buy British if you're British. You know, there would be a kind of, I think, and I'm not saying we should go and give all the money to Helsing.
Lomax, I'm interested in your thoughts. So, you know, why do we have primes? Well, we got primes because, you know, what happens when the war ends and the defense companies, the defense contractors, they run out of business, right? Do they run out of money? Do they go bankrupt? And what happens if companies that are supplying the defense systems we rely on, the fighter jets or the missile systems or whatever it is, they go bankrupt? Can we no longer get our kit serviced? Will the technology wander off to serve hostile powers, all that stuff? So we've been keeping and consolidating these defense primes into some very, very big companies. Is your argument that we should just let them die? Kind of the Lockheed Martins, the BAE systems.
No. I let them compete. Let them compete.
But this is not how they work. I don't even think they know how to do that. I mean,
Evolve
that's what
or
they
die,
did
Matt.
once upon a
Evolve
time,
or
right?
die. Evolve or die.
This is my question. So you would let them die?
Yeah, definitely.
But does that not then mean you're going to put your country at risk? Because how are you going to get the kit you've already bought serviced? What about the skills and expertise that reside in that company that are now at risk of wandering off to maybe foreign powers? Don't forget, Europe's biggest defense company today is BAE Systems. You don't have to go back very far when they were on the brink. Rolls-Royce, one of the most successful aircraft engine manufacturers in the world, they were also belly up once upon a time.
What the hell's going on, Mads, here? Sorry, what are you advocating for incumbents here? This is the new, what's happened? What happened to Mads in Singapore?
Because I think your vision is beautiful. Let them just all slug it all out. I'm just not sure how that works in defense.
Okay. There's always an element of us, of the unknown here. But I think you have to let people try.
You let them die.
You have to let them.
Maybe it's the right answer. But I know
look, some of these new
been
companies.
where the worry has been
some of these new companies will get halfway, and may end up being acquired. Like, because the existing old school businesses of the primes are delivering much more cash now, which will maybe enable them to buy in some of this stuff. I would not be relying on Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems, Leonardo to be building my future autonomous warfare stack. I wouldn't be relying on them.
No, because the procurement model is completely broken.
So that you're going to overpay.
Yeah. Yes, because the procurement model is broken. The way defense procurement works today is the MODs of this world, they buy off a PowerPoint, right? The defense contractors and the MODs, they'll get together and they'll say, here's the beautiful vision for what we should build. And then you'll commission something. And then, as you say, it'll take 10 years or 20 years and endless cost overruns. And the scope will keep changing. And in the end, you'll end up with something that's not what you ordered, and it'll be too late. Whereas what the next generation companies are doing is they say, we're building it speculatively, we're designing the aircraft, we're designing the missile system, we're designing these things and building them. And then you can buy them once we've built them or once we've designed them, not off a PowerPoint, but here's actually a product for you to buy, which is a much better way for capitalism to work. Now, of course, that is how defense worked once upon a time. It's just that you have these peaks and troughs, and then defense companies end up consolidating, and you want to keep the last ones alive, because what happens if there's no Lockheed Martin anymore? I mean, how are we going to service the world's fleet of F-35s?
But Mads, getting to a state of too big to fail is no bad thing. I mean, if it does get to that.
Maybe Palmer Luckey is sitting there in Anduril being like, at some point, maybe America's is just so all in on this, but like at some point the defense market's going to cool off and the Americans going to reduce, the Democrats will get in, they'll reduce the defense budget from 1 trillion to 600 million, and the R&D budget will come down. Like maybe we should have take all of this cool technology and apply it to civilian applications. And that's like, maybe they're already doing it, probably are,
So a lot of it ends up there.
So I don't know, but I think the time is to be bold here, and I'm oversimplifying things massively, but I do think, and I take FCAS as an example, and it's unfair to all the people who spent the last 10 years working on it, but they can probably go and get jobs in these potentially amazingly new, well-funded companies that are much more dynamic and fast-moving. Rip it up, start again, and, back to the point around who have the people in the Middle East called upon to defend them in their hour of need from a technology standpoint? Someone in Europe, Ukraine. That's actually a very unique thing. No one ever came to the Europeans for help before. So actually, maybe there is a kind of kernel of upside here.
Loving it. Talking of booms and upsides, the last on the docket, normally we would have a little semi-throwaway conversation deal of the week where we kind of talk about the deals that have caught our eyes. But this week, I want to dig in a little bit deeper into Proxima Fusion, because a European fusion startup has signed a deal to build the continent's first commercial fusion power plant. This feels like a big one. So Proxima Fusion is building a €2 billion stellarator. Mads, I'm going to ask you what the freak a stellarator is in a minute. In Garching, southern Germany, just outside Munich, with a commercial plant to follow at a former nuclear site. Is a stellarator's ready to commercialize? The tokamaks not the way to go? Mads, what the hell is a stellarator?
A fusion reactor is a wonderful thing, trying to replicate the power of the sun here on Earth. And stellarators and tokamaks are two sort of variants of ways of trying to do that. You sort of create a donut-shaped magnetic bottle where you can have some plasma inside. And this plasma is super, super hot. It's got hundreds of millions of degrees, right? Very, very hot. The difference between the two reactor types are how they hold the plasma. Now, the tokamak, which is sort of the more common variant, they use external magnets plus an internal plasma current. The thing about these is that they're a little bit easier to make, and people have been working on them for a long time. And we've got a continuous pulse up to, I think, almost 20 minutes now of sort of continuous power. But they are inherently unstable. And after 70 years, there's still nobody can run one 24/7. So we haven't made them very stable yet. They sort of keep failing because of this pulse that sits inside that can sort of jump off the chain, if you will. Stellarators, on the other hand, they rely on external magnets only that are twisted in a certain way, certain shapes, complex 3D shapes. So there's no current inside, there's no disruption, and it's a genuinely continuous operation. It's much harder to build, but if you can build it, it just works. And so we have a team that was spun out from the Max Planck Institute in Germany, and they built the world's most advanced stellarator there. They're real scientists, kind of real Germans that can make real engineering stuff. And now they've created this company here, and this is a €2 billion on the table. Now, they're talking about this as a commercial fusion plant, which sounds really, really cool. I think the truth is it is probably still mostly R&D. They're talking about 5 years from now getting to the first net energy gain. So net energy gain just means it's going to produce more energy than we put into it, not on a commercial basis, just to make that work from an R&D perspective. Commercial power, maybe in the late 2030s, kind of meaningful grid contribution, maybe 25 years away. So it's not going to help us with the current conflict in Hormuz. I mean, let's just, be honest there. But then it's also worth remembering, Airbus took 20 years to go from incorporation to first profit. Now, some of these things take time, and today Airbus is the global market leader. And that's how you build it. You got to start, and I think they're starting, and I just love to see it. I think the Americans are still better at getting more private capital into this. There's still a lot of government money that's coming in, but it's happening.
How do you run a seed fund, I run a seed fund. There's a bunch of seed funds that put money into this company, right? How do you think about that in terms of their ability to generate? Do you think there's a very high risk they get, recapped out at some point or not? Like there's going to have to be, that's a long journey, right? For a seed fund to be putting, as a reminder, these funds obviously normally 10 years.
They need to hit valuation milestones, and I think they're outlooking 5 years to get to positive net energy gain. And I think if they can do that, that's where the valuation inflection is. And 5 years is within the horizon of a seed fund. You don't have to get all the way to commercial power generation.
Of course.
So I think it's a little bit like one of your biotech bets.
Yeah. And then you can secondary your way out at that point.
I think so, yeah.
So is there a fusion investment coming from SuperSeed? Soon?
I would love to. I've been looking for doing energy stuff for a long time. I would love to do stuff in energy.
Look, I love these moonshot projects. We need more than one. We need to collaborate across the continent. I love that the Germans are doing it, but I also hate that the Germans are doing it. I really want us to come together because this requires deep pools of capital, and the North American businesses are better capitalized, and I want us to win. So let's pool more capital and more resource so we can have more of these big, bold plays. Europe needs it.
I wonder what the Chinese are up to on this.
They are. Well. The competitors in China have nearly limitless capital behind them.
Open question. Anyone know where they're at technically?
The 17 minutes it's I believe from the Chinese tokamak reactor.
And it was 20 in southern France, wasn't it, from the tokamak? There.
So you have Europe and China are kind of similar on the tokamak front, but the question is whether tokamak will ever get us there.
I see. That's the challenge. Hence the Stellarator push.
Boom.
Well, I'm going to do some reading up over the weekend. I don't know about you fine people, but I'm going to get into quantum and fusion. As always, 10 years off. Gentlemen, anything else? Any exciting moves in the coming week? What's happening? Anything else you want to talk about?
Got an outsized founder dinner in Barcelona next Thursday.
You doing what in Barcelona, Lomax?
I'm going to be in Barcelona. We got a dinner for exited founders.
Lovely. Love Barcelona. You spend many a weekend partying there. Mads, anything in your diary that's exciting?
I will be in London next week, and I look forward to
it. What? Home turf? Well, I will see you here, my good man. Thank you, gentlemen. Until next week, all of the love.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Have a good one.